"Mom, you're not just the best mom in the world, you changed someone's world too." Those were the words a little boy said to his struggling single mom, after she unknowingly softened the heart of a billionaire CEO. But how did a woman with nothing end up changing a man who had everything? Maya Johnson was only 32 years old, but if you asked her, she felt decades older. Life had a way of putting weight on her shoulders, not just the weight of bills and long work shifts, but the heavy responsibility of raising her son alone in a world that seemed to get more expensive every single day. Her mornings began before the sun even touched the sky. The alarm clock would ring at 4:30 a.m., and while the rest of the city still slept, Maya would quietly drag herself out of bed, careful not to wake her 7-year-old son, Ethan, who was curled up under a blanket on their worn-out couch. Their apartment was small, just 2 cramped bedrooms and a tiny kitchen that always smelled faintly of yesterday's coffee, but it was home. She would tiptoe to the bathroom, splash cold water on her face, and look in the mirror. The dark circles under her eyes told the story of sleepless nights and endless worry. But then she would remind herself, "I have to keep going. For Ethan." By 5:30 a.m., she was dressed in her diner uniform, a simple blue dress and an apron with her name stitched in fading thread. At the diner, she spent hours on her feet, balancing trays, refilling coffee cups, and smiling at customers who barely noticed the exhaustion in her eyes. Tips weren't always good, but every quarter and dollar she earned mattered. When her shift ended in the afternoon, most people would go home and rest. Not Maya. She would rush home to help Ethan with his homework, cook whatever meal she could afford that week, and tuck him in with a kiss on the forehead. But when the clock struck 9 p.m., while most mothers were reading bedtime stories, Maya was heading out the door again. This time, to her second job, cleaning offices downtown. She lived in a cycle of exhaustion. Yet, despite how hard things got, Maya found joy in the smallest moments. And that night, after dragging herself through the diner's long shift, she came home to something unexpected. On the kitchen table, in the glow of their single lamp, sat Ethan, crayons scattered everywhere. His little face lit up when she walked in. "Mom, look what I made for you," he said, holding up a piece of paper proudly. It was a hand-drawn card with a shaky heart in the middle. In colorful letters, slightly crooked but filled with love, it read, "Best Mom in the World." Maya dropped her bag, her tired legs giving way as she crouched down and hugged her son tightly. Tears pricked her eyes as she whispered, "Thank you, baby. You don't know how much this means to me." That one moment, a simple card, drawn with crayons, was enough to make her forget the pain in her back, the ache in her feet, and the endless worry about bills. For Maya, that little piece of paper was proof that her sacrifices mattered. But what Maya didn't realize was that her story was about to take a turn. Her quiet struggle, her unshakable love, and her resilience were going to inspire someone she had never met before, someone who lived in an entirely different world. And that brings us to a man named Alexander Pierce. While Maya's days were filled with stretching every dollar, Alexander Pierce's life couldn't have been more different. At 45 years old, Alexander was at the top of the corporate ladder. He was the kind of man whose name was printed on glossy magazines and splashed across headlines in business news. His face was familiar in every boardroom, his signature carried weight, and his decisions could shift markets. He lived in a world of endless wealth. His penthouse apartment sat high above the city skyline, with floor-to-ceiling windows that gave him a view of everything below: the bustling streets, the glowing lights, and the lives of people who would never know what it felt like to live in his shoes. His closet was filled with tailored suits, his garage with cars worth more than some people's homes, and his bank account with numbers too high to imagine. To the outside world, Alexander had it all. But appearances can be deceiving. Behind closed doors, his penthouse was empty. Too empty. The walls were bare, except for expensive art pieces chosen by decorators. His fridge was stocked, but no one ever cooked in his kitchen. And though his phone was always buzzing with calls and emails, when it came to family or friends, there was silence. Alexander was known for being ruthless in business. To him, emotions were distractions, and kindness was weakness. Employees respected him, but they also feared him. He had no patience for mistakes and no time for personal connections. Every minute of his life was about profit, deals, and maintaining his empire. But what no one saw, what he never allowed anyone to see, was the loneliness that crept in every night when he returned to his penthouse. The silence was deafening. The victories in business meant little when there was no one to share them with. And though Alexander would never admit it out loud, he was tired. Tired of the fake smiles in boardrooms, tired of being surrounded by people who only wanted something from him, tired of living in a cage made of gold. What he didn't know was that soon, his path would cross with a woman whose life looked nothing like his. And through her struggles, her dignity, and her love for her son, Alexander's carefully guarded world would begin to unravel. Because one night, in the quiet of his own corporate office, Alexander was about to meet Maya. And what happened in that moment would change everything. Maya had learned to live with exhaustion. It was almost second nature to her now. But one evening, things became a little more complicated. Her babysitter called just an hour before her night shift. "I'm so sorry, Maya. I can't make it tonight," she said. Maya's heart sank. She didn't have family nearby, and her friends were either working or too far away to help. She looked at Ethan, who was sitting at the kitchen table, finishing his homework with his pencil clenched tightly in his little hand. For a moment, she considered calling her boss and begging for the night off. But she knew she couldn't afford it. Rent was due in just a few days, and missing a shift meant falling behind. She knelt down beside her son. "Ethan, sweetheart," she said softly, "would you be okay if you came with me to work tonight? I promise it won't be long. You can draw or read while I clean." Ethan nodded without hesitation. "That's okay, Mom. I'll be good." And so, later that night, while most kids his age were tucked in bed, Ethan walked hand in hand with his mother into the towering glass building downtown where she worked. The office was quiet, the air cold from the hum of the air conditioners, the floors shining under fluorescent lights. It was a world Ethan had never seen before, long hallways lined with doors, desks with computers sleeping in the dark, and large windows that looked out over the city. Maya handed him a notebook and a few crayons she'd tucked into her bag. "Stay here in the break room, okay? I'll be just down the hall." Ethan nodded, already flipping open the notebook. Maya got to work. She vacuumed carpets, wiped down conference tables, and emptied trash bins, her body moving almost on autopilot. But what she didn't know was that tonight would be different. Tonight, her world was about to collide with someone she never expected. Because while Maya assumed the building was empty, one man had returned after hours, the very man whose name was on the building itself. Alexander Pierce had left an earlier meeting frustrated, and instead of heading home, he decided to come back to the office to review some contracts in peace. His polished shoes echoed against the marble floor as he walked through the dimly lit hallways. That's when he noticed something unusual: the faint sound of crayons scratching against paper. Curious, he followed the sound until he reached the break room. And there, sitting at the table, was a little boy, Ethan. Alexander frowned. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice deep and commanding. Ethan looked up, startled at first, then gave a small smile. "Hi, my mom's working. She said I could draw while I wait." Alexander stepped closer, his expensive suit sharp against the dull office lights. "And who's your mom?" Before Ethan could answer, Maya walked in, carrying a trash bag. The moment her eyes landed on Alexander, her heart dropped into her stomach. She knew exactly who he was. The man who owned the company. The man whose approval, even indirectly, could mean everything for her job. I'm so sorry, Mr. Pierce," she stammered, quickly pulling Ethan to his side. "My babysitter canceled last minute, and I didn't have anyone else. He'll stay out of the way, I promise." Alexander studied her for a moment, his face unreadable. He wasn't used to being surprised in his own building. But before he could respond, Ethan spoke again, his small voice breaking the tension. "Are you lonely?" Ethan asked innocently, tilting his head as he looked at the powerful zit. The room went silent. Alexander blinked, caught completely off guard. No one had ever dared ask him something so personal, especially not a child. Maya's cheeks burned with embarrassment. "Ethan," she whispered harshly, "don't be rude." But Alexander didn't get angry. For the first time in a long time, he didn't know what to say. That one simple question hit him harder than any business negotiation ever had. Lonely? He hadn't even thought about it in years. But as he stood there, staring at this child who saw right through him, Alexander realized he didn't have an answer. And that moment, that innocent question from a 7-year-old boy, was the beginning of something neither Maya nor Alexander could have ever predicted. Because from that night forward, their lives would begin to intertwine in ways that would test them, change them, and eventually, surprise them all. But how could a billionaire CEO, a man hardened by years of cold ambition, possibly find himself connected to a single mother and her little boy? The answer would reveal itself in the days to come. And it would all begin with small acts and unexpected connections. After that night in the break room, things were different. Alexander Pierce couldn't shake the image of Ethan looking up at him with those wide, innocent eyes, asking him a question no adult had ever dared. "Are you lonely?" That question lingered with him, echoing in his mind as he rode home in the back of his luxury car, as he stepped into his empty penthouse, as he poured himself a glass of wine to drown out the silence. Was he lonely? He had always convinced himself he wasn't. He had wealth, he had power, he had respect. But somehow, none of those things made him feel less empty when the sun went down. Meanwhile, Maya tried to put the encounter behind her. She worried that bringing Ethan had ruined her chances of keeping her job. The last thing she needed was to get on the wrong side of a billionaire CEO. But when she showed up for her next shift, she was surprised to find that Alexander hadn't said a word about it. Instead, he noticed her. At first, their encounters were small. Passing in the hallways, Alexander would offer a polite nod, something he never did with staff. When Ethan occasionally had to tag along, Alexander would find himself lingering nearby, watching the boy draw superheroes or robots on scrap paper while Maya worked. One evening, Alexander stopped to ask, "What are you drawing this time?" Ethan beamed, holding up his picture. "This is my mom. She's a superhero. She works 2 jobs, and she never gives up. She's stronger than anyone." Alexander's eyes flickered to Maya, who was dusting a desk nearby, pretending not to hear but blinking back tears. She didn't want pity, but hearing her son say those words reminded her of why she kept fighting every single day. Alexander, for the first time in years, felt something shift inside him. Admiration, respect, even warmth. Over the following weeks, these little interactions grew. Alexander discovered that Maya was not just hardworking, but incredibly wise. Despite her struggles, she spoke with dignity, never bitterness. When he made an offhand comment about how money makes the world go round, Maya looked him straight in the eye and said gently, "Money keeps the lights on, yes. But kindness? Kindness keeps people alive. You can buy things, Mr. Pierce, but you can't buy love." Her words stayed with him. They challenged him. And in ways he didn't understand, they began to soften the walls he had built around himself. He found excuses to check in on them. Some nights, he'd bring Ethan a sketchpad or a box of markers, saying it was just extra office supplies. Other times, he'd casually ask Maya about her day, though no one in his company could remember the last time Alexander Pierce asked anyone that question. Ethan, of course, was completely unfiltered. "Do you ever laugh?" he asked Alexander one night. Caught off guard, Alexander actually chuckled. "I do," he said, surprising even himself. It was in those small moments, a boy's innocent curiosity, a mother's quiet strength, and a billionaire's reluctant smile, that something unexpected was happening. A bond was forming, a connection that went beyond wealth, beyond status, beyond the walls of class and circumstance. But just as Alexander was beginning to rediscover his own humanity through Maya and Ethan, life was about to deal Maya a devastating blow. Because sometimes, it's not the everyday struggles that break you, it's the unexpected storms you never see coming. And for Maya, that storm would come in the form of her son's sudden illness. For a while, life carried on in that fragile rhythm. Maya worked, Ethan dreamed, and Alexander, for reasons he couldn't fully explain, found himself quietly drawn into their world. But then, one chilly November evening, everything changed. It started small. Ethan had been coughing a little more than usual. Maya thought it was just the weather, maybe a seasonal cold. She bundled him up in sweaters, made him chicken soup, and kissed his forehead the way mothers do, whispering, "You'll be okay, baby. Mom's here." But as the days passed, the cough grew worse. His little body seemed weaker. His energy, the spark that made him the joyful, curious boy Alexander had grown to look forward to seeing, began to fade. And one night, as Maya was scrubbing the floors of a conference room, Ethan suddenly clutched his stomach and collapsed in pain. Maya dropped the mop, her heart pounding. "Ethan!" she screamed, rushing to his side. His skin was burning with fever, his breathing shallow. In a panic, she scooped him up in her arms and raced out of the building. She didn't have a car, so she hailed the first cab she saw, begging the driver to hurry to the nearest hospital. The next hours were a blur. Bright hospital lights. The sound of machines beeping. Doctors rushing in and out of the room. Maya pacing the hallway, wringing her hands, silently praying. When the doctor finally approached, his face was serious. "Your son has a severe infection. He'll need immediate treatment and possibly surgery. We're going to do everything we can, but we'll need to run more tests." Maya nodded, fighting back tears. "Do whatever it takes. Please, just make him better." But then came the question she dreaded. Insurance. Payment. The bills were overwhelming. Thousands of dollars she didn't have. Her diner wages, her cleaning job, none of it even came close. She tried applying for emergency assistance, but the paperwork would take time Ethan didn't have. That night, as she sat by his bedside, watching her son sleep restlessly with 4 tubes taped to his little arm, Maya's heart shattered. She thought about quitting one of her jobs, about selling what little they had, about sacrificing everything, even her own health, just to keep him alive. She held Ethan's small hand and whispered, "Don't worry, baby. I'll figure this out. I always do." What she didn't know was that someone else had already heard about Ethan. Someone who, against all odds, cared more than he should. Alexander Pierce had a way of keeping tabs on people in his company. And when word reached him that Maya's son was in the hospital, he didn't hesitate. That very night, he made a phone call, not as a CO, but as a man who couldn't stand the thought of a little boy's future slipping away. Quietly, behind the scenes, Alexander pulled strings. He called in the best specialists. He arranged for bills to disappear into charity funds. He made sure the hospital staff treated Ethan as though he were their most important patient. But he never told Maya it was him. He wanted her to believe it was fate, or compassion, or maybe even just the system working in her favor for once. Because Alexander knew Maya's pride, her dignity, mattered more to her than money ever could. And so, as Ethan's condition slowly began to improve, Maya had no idea that the man she had once feared was cold and ruthless was quietly standing in the shadows, protecting her son. But secrets have a way of coming to light. And soon, Maya would discover the truth, in a way she never expected. Because Alexander wasn't just planning to save Ethan's life. He was planning something much bigger. Something that would change Maya's world forever. Weeks passed, and slowly but surely, Ethan began to recover. The fevers eased. The color returned to his cheeks. And one morning, as sunlight streamed through the hospital blinds, Maya woke up in the stiff chair beside his bed to hear him whisper, "Mom, can we go home soon?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Yes, baby. I promise." The doctors were optimistic. Ethan's surgery had been successful, the infection was under control, and his recovery was remarkable. But what struck Maya most was the way the hospital staff seemed to go above and beyond for her son. The bills that once terrified her never arrived. The specialists who usually charged thousands seemed to appear without hesitation. It didn't make sense, but in the whirlwind of relief, she didn't question it too deeply. Still, one thought weighed on her. She couldn't keep living like this, balancing 2 jobs and risking her health and her son's well-being. Something had to change. She considered quitting the office cleaning job, even though it meant losing critical income. She just didn't know how much longer she could go on. But then, an unexpected phone call arrived. It was an invitation, formal, printed on crisp cardstock with the golden seal of Pierce Global embossed on top. It was addressed to Maya Johnson. The words inside shocked her. You are cordially invited to attend the Pierce Global Annual Gala as a guest of honor." Her first thought was that it must be a mistake. People like her didn't go to galas. She was a maid, a waitress, a single mom. She didn't own gowns or jewelry. She almost tore the invitation up, afraid it was a cruel prank. But something inside her, maybe curiosity, maybe hope, told her to hold on to it. A week later, Maya stood outside the grand ballroom of a five-star hotel, her hands trembling as she smoothed the second-hand dress she'd borrowed from a kind neighbor. Ethan, still recovering but strong enough to walk, held her hand, his little bow tie slightly crooked. When she stepped inside, her breath caught. The room sparkled with chandeliers, polished floors, and people in elegant suits and gowns. She felt completely out of place. But then, across the room, she saw him, Alexander Pierce, standing tall, confident as ever, but this time with a softer look in his eyes. When the speeches began, Maya tried to keep to the back, hoping no one noticed her. But then, Alexander stepped onto the stage. The chatter died down instantly. All eyes turned to him. He cleared his throat and began in the deep, commanding voice everyone knew. "Tonight, we celebrate success. But not the kind of success measured by numbers or profits. Tonight, I want to talk about a different kind of success, the kind that changes lives." The room was silent. Alexander continued, "For years, I believed wealth was about power, about control, about being untouchable. But recently, someone showed me I was wrong. Someone reminded me that true strength is found in resilience. True wealth is found in love. And true inspiration can come from the most unexpected places." He paused, and then, to Maya's shock, he said her name. "Maya Johnson, would you please join me on stage?" Gasps rippled through the crowd as heads turned toward her. Maya froze, her heart hammering. She shook her head slightly, mouthing, "No, not me." But Alexander smiled warmly and extended his hand. Slowly, trembling, Maya walked forward with Ethan by her side. When she reached the stage, Alexander addressed the audience. "This woman is more than just a single mother. She is the embodiment of courage, of dignity, of sacrifice. She has reminded me of something I had forgotten, that humanity is worth more than any fortune. And because of her, tonight I am announcing the launch of the Pierce Foundation, dedicated to supporting single parents across this country." The audience erupted in applause. Maya stood there, stunned, tears brimming in her eyes as Alexander continued, "And it is only fitting that the very first community advisor for this foundation is the woman who inspired it all, Maya Johnson." For a moment, she couldn't breathe. She covered her mouth with her hand, shaking her head in disbelief. She had come to this place as a maid, a struggling mother, and now, in front of some of the most powerful people in the city, a billionaire was giving her the recognition she never imagined. The applause grew louder. Ethan squeezed her hand tightly and whispered, "Mom, you did it. You're amazing." But what Maya didn't yet realize was that this wasn't just about recognition. This was the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one where she and Ethan would no longer struggle in silence. And as the spotlight shone on her, she couldn't help but wonder, what would this unexpected bond between a billionaire and a single mom truly mean for the future? The answer was even more heartwarming than she could have imagined. In the weeks that followed the gala, Maya's life began to shift in ways she never thought possible. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving, she was beginning to breathe. The Pierce Foundation gave her the chance to use her voice, her experiences, her struggles, to help other single parents who were walking the same path she had once walked. Instead of scrubbing offices in the middle of the night, she was sitting at tables where decisions were made, making sure the stories of mothers like her were heard. But Maya didn't let the sudden change get to her head. She still lived humbly, still cooked dinner for Ethan every night, still reminded him to finish his homework before watching cartoons. What changed was the weight on her shoulders. For the first time, it felt like she wasn't carrying it all alone. And Alexander? His world transformed to... The man who once filled his days with back-to-back meetings now found himself carving out time to join Ethan for a game of catch in the park or to sit with Maya over coffee just to listen. He wasn't just a billionaire CEO anymore. He was a man rediscovering what it meant to feel. The people around him noticed. His employees said he smiled more. He listened more. Even his board members whispered about how different he seemed. Some thought he was distracted, but those who looked closer realized he wasn't distracted. He was alive. One Sunday afternoon, Maya and Ethan invited Alexander to their small apartment for dinner. It was nothing fancy, just spaghetti and garlic bread. The three of them sat at the little kitchen table, laughing as Ethan told stories about school. At one point, Ethan set his fork down, looked at his mom, then turned to Alexander. "See, Mom?" Ethan said with a grin. "I told you you're not just the best mom in the world. You changed someone's world too." Maya's eyes filled with tears as she pulled her son into a hug. Alexander looked at them both, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something money could never buy: family. From that moment on, their bond was sealed. Not by contracts or wealth, but by trust, kindness, and the simple truth that sometimes the smallest acts, a child's drawing, a mother's sacrifice, a question asked at just the right moment, can ripple out to change lives in ways no one expects. And so, Maya's struggle, the sleepless nights, the endless jobs, the quiet tears she cried when no one was watching, became the very thing that softened the heart of a man who had everything but was missing the most important thing: humanity. The lesson? True wealth isn't measured in dollars, cars, or skyscrapers. True wealth is measured in love, compassion, and the lives you touch. Because at the end of the day, when the money fades, when the applause dies down, all that really matters is the difference you make in someone else's life. And Maya, the single mom who once thought she had nothing, ended up giving a billionaire the greatest gift of all: his humanity back. Moral of this story: success without love is empty. Wealth without compassion is meaningless. But when you use your life, your struggles, and your heart to inspire others, you become richer than any billionaire could ever dream to be. This story reminds us that no matter how small we feel, our actions can touch lives in ways we may never imagine. If this moved you, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today, because sometimes one story is all it takes to change a life. And remember, we're not just telling stories. We're changing lives.